This video was produced with the support of the game's designer, Sebastian Bae, and the publisher, the Dietz Foundation. The Dietz Foundation is the world's only not-for-profit game publisher. Its mission is to make games fun and educational, and to use proceeds to fund scholarships and games for schools and community organizations. For more information, visit www.dietzfoundation.org. Welcome to this tutorial for Littoral Commander, Indo-Pacific. This video is designed to get you familiar with the game and the system, but it's not meant to be a replacement for the rulebook and the player aids. Keep those handy at all times when learning and playing the game. Littoral Commander Indo-Pacific is set in a hypothetical near future, and the two opposing factions consist of the U.S. Marine Corps, or USMC for short, and the People's Liberation Army Navy Marine Corps, or Plan MC for short. Depending on the scenario, the two sides, or teams as they're referred to in the rulebook, will have different victory conditions that may have to do with the number of opposing units destroyed or positioning on the map by the end of a set amount of turns. Both sides have units represented by counters, which are deployed to the map, and unit tracker mats to keep track of the status of each unit on the map. These units all represent different marine and naval forces. The units are deployed to the map in task forces, with each being controlled by different players on the same side. Thus, Littoral Commander is a game suitable for 2, 4, and 6 players, depending on the scenarios being played. There are a total of 6 scenarios in the book that come with the initial printing of the game and more in development for future play. There are a total of 4 maps in the original box. And for the purposes of this tutorial, I'll be mostly referencing the first 2 scenarios, which will take place on the Luzon map. There are other special markers for proxy units, ISRs, which are unmanned surveillance systems or other units, Special Operations Forces, SOFs, and subs. These may interplay depending upon the scenario and the cards used. Also, each scenario will dictate if there are specific scenario caveats or rules, such as receiving free military deception or naval deception markers. These can be stacked with the main combat units and shield those units against hits in combat. And finally, there are the Joint Capability Cards, or JCCs. Each team will be able to purchase a set number of cards as outlined in the scenario and use them throughout play. Each card has a specific command point or CP value, and the total value of the cards that can be purchased by each side is dictated by the scenario, as well as how often they can be purchased throughout the game. There are a lot of these JCCs. Each side has their own supply. I'll go through them at a high level. Note that the intention of the game is to spend a good deal of time planning your card selection and pondering your myriad options and devising an overall strategy. So discovering these cards and their capabilities on your own is half the fun. Let's now look at the units available to each side on a high level. The units can be deployed to either land or sea. Naval units have the outline of the ship that they represent. Otherwise, ground units will have an icon. Just below the icon is the unit designator. The scenarios will refer to specific units by this designator as they are deployed in the deployment stage. Below the designator is a series of numbers in 1 or 2 colored sections. The large numbers represent the combat values of the unit for the specific type of combat, and the smaller numbers are the range in hexes. It is important to note that the unit's hex is counted as 0 and range is counting outward from there. The color and shape tells you what type of combat the unit can engage in. The green square is ground assault. The red square is long range strike, or LRS for short. The purple pentagon is intercept. And the blue circle is not really a type of combat, it's a resupply value, as those units will increase the supply of other combat units. More on that later. So for example, Plan MC's 1 Delta has a ground combat value of 9 and 0 range. All ground combat, as you'll see, has to take place in the same hex as their original target. Their Type 54 frigate T-54573 FFG has an LRS combat value of 10, range of 5, and also an intercept value of 12, range of 2. USMC's 3 Fox supply unit has a supply value of 4, range of 0. Their 3-1 Bravo has ground combat value of 8, again range of 0, and LRS value of 8, range of 9. 2-2 Whiskey has 2 LRS values, 10 and 12, and their respective ranges of 4 and 9. That represents 2 different types of munitions on this ship. Note that the player commanding this unit will only be allowed to use one at a time in an attack when they get into gameplay. These unit pieces all have corresponding unit trackers in order to track the values of the unit supply as well as their hit points or HP. The HP is how many hits that unit can take before it is eliminated from the map. Most units have 2 HP. When the units are deployed, take the corresponding tracker and place cubes with the matching color on the space of that square. The greens, reds, and purples all denote the supply level of that unit for the respective attack type, ground assault, LRS, and intercept. The black cubes are the HP level. Looking at USMC's 1-1 Bravo, that unit starts with an LRS supply of 2, ground attack supply of 5, and an HP of 2. If units have more than one LRS CV value, the square on the left is marked with a red cube and the one on the right with an orange cube. Supply units, like USMC's Kilo, starts with a supply level of 20. This is how much it will be able to supply combat units. You'll see how that works as we get into actions. Kilo's HP starts at 3. Looking back at the counter itself, the last big number you'll notice is a gray hex in the top right. These are movement points, or MPs for short. The amount of movement that unit can take is dependent on map terrain, which we'll look at next. The very colorful hexes on the map are set up that way to determine terrain values quickly as a player. The blue sea and Greenland hexes are an MP value of 1. It just costs 1 of the unit's MPs to move into the hex. Smooth sailing and smooth marching. Yellow values are 2, so they'll cost 2 MPs. Orange will cost 3, and also reduce combat values against attacking units in this hex by 1. Brown requires an MP of 4 and reduces the combat values of the attacking units in this hex by 2. The dark red are impassable. No unit may enter or be deployed to those hexes. Note that there are some green shore and shore adjacent hexes that have higher MP values. Now that we have a high-level overview of how to read the unit counters and map, let's set up a scenario, then go through the sequence of play before looking at the actions each side can take on their turn. Starting with a meeting engagement scenario, which is the first one, very introductory, low difficulty, only 3 turns and it can be played with 2 to 4 players. There's a designer's note and breakdown of the situation that leads up to this engagement. The order of battle tells you which side gets which units and to which task force they are assigned. This scenario is very specific as it dictates the hexes that each unit is deployed to, whereas others involve more player choice. But before we get to that, let's talk about the stages in each turn. The first stage is planning, followed by deployment. After that, the team's task forces will trade action phases back and forth in what is called an impulse. Each task force, whether they're controlled by one player or individual players on that side, gets 1 impulse per turn. After all task forces have acted, then there's the initiative check. Whichever team had destroyed the most enemy units seizes initiative, which will dictate who acts first on the next turn. Then comes the victory check to see if either side has met their victory conditions for that scenario. If not, proceed to the next action phase. Unless the scenario allows for more cards to be purchased at the beginning of certain turns, at which point a planning stage will take place again, but that deployment will only ever take place once. Planning involves receiving the units as outlined in the scenario into the respective task forces, assigning players to those task forces if there's more than one per side, then choosing the JCCs based on the command points outlined in the Special Rules and Considerations section of the scenario. In the first scenario, you'll see that each team receives a total of 6 command points, or CPs. So the value of cards that they select may total 6. So that's 1 5 and a 1, 3 2s, or a 2 and a 4, 3 1s and a 3. You do the math. There are some 0-point JCCs that are assigned to specific units, such as Aegis, which is attached to a US DDG-X. These are noted in this scenario. All the JCCs selected by a team are available to all task force for that team. Thus, all players on that team, unless they're put to use right away, as they're attached to one of the task force units. But be sure to read all the special rules and considerations, as it may tell the sides to start with certain JCCs, and the facilitator notes may say to remove other JCCs before selection, as some might not be applicable in this scenario, so it makes sense to reduce the amount of cards to sift through. It might not seem like a lot of purchase power in the first scenario, but don't worry. The second scenario, Lose on Pass, allows for 15 CPs to start, and there's additional turns that allow for even more CP, thus more JCCs in the mix. More on the JCCs once we get through the sequence of play. I'll save most of that for later. Now, on to the next stage, which is deployment. Units get deployed to the map face down, and thus concealed, as that's how they'll start. They will be revealed throughout play, and even can become concealed again. If you think you may need help remembering which units are which, you can just note their location on a piece of paper. As noted in the first scenario, the deployment hex is already decided for the players. Compare that with the second scenario, Lose on Pass, which deploys more units and gives guidance on where the units can be placed, north of or south of certain hexes, allowing for more player choice and flexibility. So the first scenario will always look like this, whereas the second scenario can look like this, as one example. This is a hypothetical setup, maybe not the most optimal. Also, as I proceed with the demonstration, I may choose setups to illustrate movement in combat that aren't ideal strategically, and I'll reveal units to show their values when in theory they should be concealed. Note that some of the units are stacked in one hex together. This is totally fine, as there is no stacking limit. Units that are stacked together can all be activated at the same time when it comes to the actions, but just know that the movement points will be determined by whichever unit has the lowest MP value, that gray hex value. Also, do not forget that units must belong to the same task force to act together. When deploying the units, be sure to set up their corresponding mats with the cubes on the trackers. Some of the JCCs might also alter the HP value of the units when attached to said unit. And this scenario may state whether certain supply levels differ from what's on the mat, so set all the cubes accordingly. This is where it makes sense to mention a special type of JCC. Each side has tactical network JCCs, which are deployed by the end of the deployment stage. Throughout play, they'll get to place cubes of that team's color on the opposing tactical network JCC. This represents their network being degraded. The cyber or EMS JCCs are marked with bolded text in their flavor text or the text in the bottom of the card. If your tactical network has 2 or 3 cubes, then all of your team's LRS and intercept CVs are reduced by 4. If your tactical network has 4 or more cubes, then all of your team's LRS and intercept CVs are reduced by 7. A player can remove degradation cubes from their tactical network during their turn at a cost of 2 AP per cube. So with this in mind, as you're sifting through the cards, watch out for the ones that have an effect on your opponent's tactical network. That may form a basis of your overall strategy. Once the scenario and special rules are fully understood, the JCCs are selected during the planning stage, and then the deployment is done, time to move on to the action stage. The scenario will call out which team has initiative, which may be used to take actions first or to defer to the other team to start with their actions, meaning they will hand over initiative to the other team. Whichever team goes first, one of their task forces will take what's called an impulse, in which they're able to activate their units for a total of 3 action points, unless otherwise stated by the scenario. Then you'll alternate impulses back to one of the other team's task forces, then back again. Remember, a task force can only do 1 impulse per action stage. Activating a unit or a stack of units will allow them to do any of these core actions: move, and or initiate combat, move and or conceal, move and or resupply, or play a JCC from that team's supply of cards. A unit or stack is limited to only one core action per turn, using one of those action points. When a stack moves, all units move, but not all units need to engage in combat, conceal, or resupply. Unstacking units will require 1 AP for each stack that revolts from that unstacking. So if you have a stack of 5 units and you want to split off into 2 stacks of 2 and 1 lone unit, that requires all 3 action points. But now they can all move off in different directions and do their own thing. So let's start by talking about movement, which is fairly straightforward. As mentioned earlier, it's determined by the lowest value MP of the units in the stack, or just 1 unit if it's a lone unit, and then the terrain value. A 3 MP unit will be able to move across 3 green hexes, or 1 green and 1 yellow, or just 1 orange. A 2 MP unit can move across 2 green, or just 1 yellow. If that 2 MP unit moves into a green hex, that uses 1 MP, so they couldn't continue into a yellow 2 MP space as they only have 1 left. If a unit wants to enter a hex that exceeds its total MP allotment, then it can only move 1 hex and not conduct any other portion of a core action. For example, a 3 MP unit can move into a 4 MP hex, but it cannot combat, conceal, or resupply. Only move that 1 hex. Note that although the blue ocean hexes are all 1 MP, some of the coast has different terrain values, which affects the naval movement. That movement can then be combined with any of the combat, conceal, or resupply actions. But there's actually another action that an activated stack or unit can take on top of those core actions, which is to exercise their zone of reconnaissance, aka the ZOR. A ground unit may thus reveal any enemy counters in one adjacent hex, thus leaving those enemy units open to combat of any kind. Naval units automatically and constantly exercise a ZOR of up to 5 hexes away. This only applies to surface naval units and not subs. So say this stack of USMC units moves into a hex with 3 other adjacent hexes containing Plan MC units. Exercising the ZOR reveals all the units in any one hex. The ZOR for ground units can only be exercised at the beginning or the end of the core action stage, including movement for that particular unit or stack. Units can also be revealed by an enemy unit moving into the same hex. As you may recall, ground assault units don't have a range, they just have to be in the same hex to initiate combat. So rolling right in and revealing those enemy units is a way to start exchanging fire right away. Whether using ZOR or rolling into that hex to reveal the units, they must be revealed in order to be targeted for attack. So let's talk combat. Initiating combat can be combined with movement, either moving into a hex to reveal the units being targeted or moving into a position for an LRS unit to get within range of a revealed target. But movement doesn't necessarily have to happen. The units being activated can just start the fight if there's a revealed enemy unit to target. Any unit that initiates combat becomes revealed itself. There are 4 types of combat, as referenced on the bottom of the units earlier on. Ground assault, long range strike or LRS, intercept, which is a defensive measure to reduce hits, and JCC triggered assaults. All types of combat are resolved with a 20-sided die, and the attacking player gets to choose the targeted unit in that hex. If the die rolled is equal to or less than the combat value for the unit's type of attack, that's a successful hit on the targeted unit. For each successful hit, reduce the HP value of the targeted unit. The attacking player can use as many dice as they have supply for that unit in its type of attack, thus reducing the supply as noted on the unit tracker for each die used. So if a ground assault unit had a ground assault supply level of 5, they can use all 5 for 5 dice, but then would be out of supply until they can resupply, which I'll cover in a bit. So a ground unit with 5 supply might want to try their chances with 3 die and keep 2 supply for later. As you'll see, ground assault can continue on the next player's turn. Ground assault can only attack the units in the same hex, but it can be any of the enemy's units in that stack. Defending units are any unit in that same hex, but not just those targeted, that have ground assault capabilities. They can fight back by committing their ground assault supply to die rolls to inflict damage on the attackers. Both sides declare at the same time the number of dice rolled in which units they're targeting. Remember that the attackers have their CV modified by the terrain. 1 less if in an orange hex, 2 less if in a brown hex. Now this doesn't affect the defenders. Whatever the results, adjust the HP levels of the units that take hits. LRS can attack as many revealed units within range of that unit, but must do so one at a time, declaring the number of dice being used for each attack and adjusting the supply. If the unit has 2 LRS values, 2 red squares on their marker, they may only use the CV and supply of one of those squares per turn activation. Units with ground assault capability may do a combined arms attack on a target that takes hits from an LRS in the same combat round, which will give a bonus of +2 to all ground assault CVs in that hex. The target of the combined arms attack must be declared before either combined arms attack is carried out. Then the dice are rolled for the LRS attack, followed by the ground assault. Thus, the attacking player can't wait to see if the LRS was successful. It's a coordinated attack, and the ground units are going in whether the LRS caused hits or not. And this is where the third type of combat comes into play, intercept. This can only be used against an LRS attack to negate a successful hit, and they are resolved at the same time as the LRS die roll. Any intercepts are declared immediately after an LRS attack is declared against a friendly unit. Like the other combat types, the unit being activated for intercept is revealed, and the player may use a die for every supply used. Each roll that is equal to or less than the CV for that intercept negates a successful LRS hit. In order to do this, the unit, which is a target of the LRS attack, must be within range of the intercepting unit, and the intercepting unit must be closer to the target than the attacking LRS unit. And like the units with multiple LRS values, the intercepts with multiple values can only use one type per turn. Both intercepts and defending ground assaults do not cost AP by the defending player, as it's not their turn. They cost the supply values of the combat being used. I said off the top the attacking player gets to choose the unit targeted in the hex, but that's unless there's a mill deck or naval mill deck unit in the stack. The defending player may choose to discard those to absorb the hits first before reducing the HP of the units targeted. One mill deck or naval mill deck will absorb 1 HP's worth of damage. If a ground assault ends with units from both sides still present in the hex, this is considered continuing combat and is marked with such a marker. Now, when the next player's turn comes around that has units in that hex, another round of combat ensues. This time there is no cost in AP, but the units attacking this time must have their combat type supplies. By the way, they can't be resupplied by the supply units if they're engaged in combat. If they don't have the supply, they can disengage using their movement points, and this will cost activation points. They can also choose to disengage and essentially retreat if they don't like their odds. Otherwise, combat ensues as normal, both sides declaring the amount of dice they're going to roll based on their supply being used, and again, registering the hits. So that's combat in a nutshell. And combat may be altered by a JCC as a defensive maneuver attached to an existing unit on the map or other cards which deliver sophisticated airborne type attacks. If not engaging in combat, the unit or stack activated may choose to move and or conceal. This is simply the act of turning the revealed units back to their concealed or hidden side. These units may not be subject to attack by enemy units until they're revealed again, either by the other team leveraging their ZOR through a JCC, by that unit engaging a combat again, either on their own turn or by the opposing player. For just 1 AP, an entire stack can move as far as their lowest MP value allows and conceal on that turn. Logistics units may move and resupply the other units to restore their ground assault, LRS, or intercept supply levels. Using 1 AP, the activated logistics unit may move and or resupply other units within range. Like the LRS values, there are sometimes 2 resupply values on a single unit, but only one can be used per turn. Multiple units that are within range of the activated value can be resupplied, and multiple logistics units in the same stack can be activated at the same time. The route to the units being supplied cannot trace through any impassable hexes or hexes with enemy units in them, but the route can go around those hexes if the resupply unit and the unit being supplied are within range. For each supply used, decrease the logistics unit's supply value and increase the recipient's. Note that the other units cannot be supplied above their original supply value as noted with the colored square on the tracker, unless there's a JCC modifying that value. Those resupply values are generic, by the way, and can be used to restore any of the ground assault LRS or intercept supplies of the recipient in any combination on a supplied action. Reminder that units engaged in ground assault from a previous turn cannot be resupplied, but if they're in the same task force for that impulse, they can disengage by using 1 AP to move out of the contested hex, get or stay within range of the resupply unit, which also needs to be activated with 1 AP. Receive supplies, and then move back into the hex, re-engaging in combat on the following turn if they so choose. Resupply does not reveal the logistics unit or the unit being supplied. Logistics units can be revealed by ZOR, enemies entering their hex, and other JCC actions, thus exposing them to attack. Okay, now let's finally look at the rest of these joint capability cards. Some of these cards are used in action, costing 1 AP to play, but others may be used in the deployment phase or as an intercept or defensive action. The cards are divided into 5 colors. Red denotes fires, giving your units or overall team more firepower in battle. Green is maneuvers, providing flexible options in battle. Purple is intercept, providing more intercept options against LRS or other JCCs. Blue is information operations, so that's cyber and electronic warfare. And yellow is C5ISR, which is command, control, communications, cyber, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Amongst all these card types are different symbols, showing how and when they can be used or even removed. The paperclip shows that this card must be attached to an existing type of unit, so they will be deployed right away in deployment and don't cost any AP to play if they replace a core action, such as combat or resupply. As stated before, note which modification it provides to the unit. It may increase the supply value, CV, or hit points. Some attached cards may require an AP to use its effect for the first time, such as cards that are both attached and persistent, which is the next symbol, the infinity symbol. That shows that this is a persistent JCC, meaning it may cost 1 AP to play initially, but it stays in play to be used once per turn by any member of the team. When used, turn that card face down to show it can't be used by any other team member or task force on that turn. The circle slash symbol is nullify, which will cancel out another player's JCC. If played defensively, it does not require an AP. The fighter jet symbol is an FTR card, so it is subject to FTR nullify, a subset of nullify, which represents fighter jets destroying the card. Like other nullify cards, they can be played defensively for no AP. Specific cards will indicate if they can FTR nullify in their text. And finally, this launcher symbol means the card is subject to an intercept action by the opposing team's units on the map. Many of the cards have a combination of the symbols on them. For example, some JCCs are attached and persistent, so they don't cost any AP to attach, but require an AP for the first time they are played, but will be free to use on subsequent turns. And some are persistent, but are also susceptible to FTR nullify and can be intercepted, and so on. In select instances, there can be a chain of intercepts, FTR nullify, or nullify actions and reactions. These chains are resolved starting with the last JCC or action in the chain. Let's see how this all plays out in a hypothetical turn for the USMC. Again, I'll take some liberties with placement in the Luzon scenario to illustrate the flow. USMC takes initiative and activates their stack with their 3 and 4 alpha units, along with 2 military decoys, and they're going to move them into a hex that has a stack of Plan MC units. But I'm going to flip the USMC units to revealed just to show which units they are, otherwise they would be concealed. Mill decks, by the way, move with the stack at the same MP value as the lowest labeled unit. So by moving into that hex, the Plan MC units are revealed, and it turns out to be their 1 and 2 alpha units along with 3 mill decks. That 1 alpha unit, by the way, Plan MCs, has an attachment beefing up their HP and their ground assault CV, so this is going to be quite the fight. USMC commits 3 dice from each of their alpha units, targeting Plan MC's 1 alpha. But on top of that, with another action point, USMC activates all 3 Charlie units way off in the distance, also targeting Plan MC 1 alpha with 3 dice for each of the LRS CV and range on the right. This LRS only has 3 supply, but the range is right for this munition and CV is higher. USMC is going for the combined arms attack, so if both attacks are successful, the ground assault CVs will be increased by 2, so those alphas will go from a 6 to an 8 in combat value. Plan MC will commit 3 dice for each ground unit in the battle. But wait, there's a naval unit belonging to Plan MC just off the shore with intercept capabilities, which will activate in defense and target those LRS coming in from the Charlie units and try to negate a powerful combined arms attack. Now, this isn't the hex that the ship was deployed to, and it would take quite a few turns to get this close to the action, but again, just showing to illustrate the point. In the original deployment hex way off to the west side of the island, they wouldn't be close enough to try and defend against the LRS, since the LRS unit is closer. But in this case, they are and will commit 4 dice to the intercept attempt. So this hypothetical scenario doesn't take into account any other JCCs which may be played in action for hits or for defense. But now, when rolling, the players need to take into account the status of their tactical network, and if there's any cubes on them, then modify the CV values as indicated on the card for any LRS and intercept attempts. All rolls happen simultaneously, which means that units which end up being destroyed in battle will still inflict hits on the enemy units they target. There are more detailed rules in the rulebook, but you should have enough info to get started and play through your first scenario. Good luck, and may the best side win.